This is a document called Two Treatises of Government, written in 1690 by John Locke. And this is about 100 years before Thomas Jefferson and the Declaration of Independence. John Locke argues that people form governments to protect their rights. In a sense, governments and people make a business deal. We, the people, say to the government, you can rule us as long as you protect us and allow us to have freedom. But according to John Locke, governments often abuse their power and violate their promises. Instead of protecting the people's rights, they take the people's rights away. According to Locke, when the government breaks its contract, then the people can rebel against the government and form their own government. John Locke is heavily quoted by Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence, and these are modified short excerpts of John Locke. So I've changed a lot of the language, I've simplified it, but these are the main ideas of John Locke. He says, this is his first quote, without government, people are in a state of nature. A state of nature, a state of perfect freedom for people to do as they wish with their time and their possessions. They need not ask permission or consent of any other man. The state of nature is also a state of perfect equality. No one has more power or authority than another. So today we call this anarchy, but he calls it the state of nature. This is where there's no laws, there's no rules, and it's a place of perfect freedom. And so the state of nature means no laws, no rules, or anarchy. And how much freedom do people have? They have total freedom, or absolute freedom. They can do whatever they want. And in the state of nature, people are perfectly equal. So there's no lords, there's no kings, there's no peasants. Every single person is equal. And he would be thinking kind of like Native Americans. He'd be like, hey, there would just be hunters and gatherers living in perfect equality with total freedom. If a man in the state of nature is free, if he is the absolute lord of his own person and possessions, why will he give up his freedom? Why will he put himself under the control of any person or institution? The obvious answer is that the rights in the state of nature are constantly exposed to the attacks of others. Hence, each man joins in society and government with others to preserve their fundamental rights of life, liberty, and property. So if you could imagine, wouldn't that be nice with no rules? You could do anything you want. There's no police. There's no one to stop you. You could drive as fast as you want. You could even do terrible violence. And the obvious answer is, well, other people would be able to do terrible violence against you, right? So we have government to preserve our fundamental rights of life, liberty, and property. We want to stay alive. We want to be able to have freedom and not be enslaved. And we want to be able to own our property and not have people take it away from us. And so what is the problem with the state of nature? Why do people join in society to create governments? And according to Locke, what are the fundamental natural rights all men are entitled to? So from here, you should be able to answer those three questions. He says the government is created to protect your life, liberty, and property. When the government tries to gain absolute power over lives, liberties, and property of the people, they abuse the power which the people put into their hands. It is then the privilege of the people to establish a new government to provide for their safety and security. So although governments are often created to protect our rights, what do governments often do? And what do we have the right to do if the government is taking away our rights? He says, however, it will be said that this philosophy may lead to frequent rebellions. Because he's basically saying, hey, if the government's taking away your rights, you can rebel. But then he backsteps a little bit, to which I answer, such revolutions are not caused by every little mismanagement in public affairs. He's saying it can't be small things. He says, but if there's a long train of abuses, and I underline this line because this is the exact line Thomas Jefferson uses in the Declaration of Independence, lies and tricks. So the government's doing things over and over and over. And make a government's bad intentions visible to the people, they cannot help see where they are going. It is no wonder that they will then rouse themselves and try to put the rule into hands which will secure to them the purpose for which the government was originally organized. Meaning, they'll reorganize the government for the purpose of protecting their rights, And so under what circumstances is a revolution justified according to Locke? And here he's referring to this key phrase. And how does this passage relate to how the colonists felt about how the British ruled the colonies? And so now this chart is a little difficult to understand. So we have the original position before government. We call this the state of nature. And today people call this anarchy. And the advantages are two, he says. You have total freedom and you have total equality. But the disadvantage is that you're unsafe and your rights are unsafe. So you create government. And the advantage is the government should protect your rights. But the disadvantage is that the government often takes away your rights. So we have what's called a revolution. This is where we overthrow the government and we create a new government. And when can we do this? We can only do this when there's been a long train of abuses. It has to be very serious because the cost. It's so costly to have a revolution. The advantages are that you might get a new government that might protect your rights. But the disadvantages often outweigh the advantages. The disadvantage is that usually lots of people die in civil war. And you end up creating like a civil war. And the new government that's created is usually worse than the old government. And America is a rare exception when we were able to overthrow our old government, create a new government. But most governments that are created often through a violent revolution are even worse. And that's just a reality in history. And so John Locke's social contract, what does the government promise? The government promises to protect our rights, to protect life, liberty, and property. And what do we promise? So citizens have to, vote, obey the law, pay taxes. We have to be willing to serve in our military if our country's being attacked. And this is basically the contract that we have. So as long as the government's doing their side of the bargain, then citizens need to do their side of the bargain. And if the government doesn't protect our rights, then our side is no longer binding, is basically what John Locke is arguing. So that is John Locke's social contract. It's kind of like a business deal that we make where the government promises us certain things and we promise certain things in exchange.